Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Party Like a Marketer. Today's guest is Darius Kemp, the head of equity and community change at Eaze. Born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, Darius grew up in a union household, as his dad was the member of the Railroad Workers Union, which is very unusual in the South, and a mother who was a nurse. Through his education at a historically black university, Alabama A&M, and experiences growing up queer in the South, he developed a passion for improving the living conditions of underserved communities. Receiving his BA in political science and criminal justice, and after working on various political campaigns in Alabama, he joined the Service Employees International Union as an organizer. After several years mobilizing and engaging with workers and unions, he joined the Peace Corps and served in Jamaica as an at-risk youth advisor. Following the Peace Corps, Darius enrolled in graduate school at the University of Birmingham in England, receiving an MA in Political Science and International Relations with a concentration on human rights. Returning to the U.S. over the next decade, Darius became the Organizing and Communications Director for the University of California Student Association, Regional Director for Working America, the community affiliate of the AFL-CIO, and joining the Representation Project, the creators of Misrepresentation and the Mask You Live In, as the Director of Mobilization. In pursuit of more autonomy, he began Just Kind Consulting to support organizational change and advise progressive political campaigns. Currently, Darius serves as the head of equity and community change at Eaze Technologies, focusing on improving the cannabis industry standards for social equity partnerships and systemic change. Darius, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Hey, Lisa, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Of course. So I always like to start this and find out a little bit more about who Darius is and how you got here. Could you tell us a little bit about your career and your work prior to cannabis and what brought you to the space?
Yeah, I actually have a very abnormal entryway into cannabis. I think a lot of people would say that they started off, maybe selling it illegally, when they were younger, or some people would say, "Oh, I've been a long time grower and cultivator because I understand the medicines and or indigenous folks or folks from the global South might have these kind of deep roots and connections to the plant." I, however, come from the kind of American westernized black background of this, and what that means is that for most of my life, I'm originally from Alabama. Most of my life, cannabis it was like, oh no, those losers and layabouts smoke weed. Losers, layabouts, ragamuffins, rapscallions, call them whatever you want, right? And I am supposed to be, and I'm pretty much a nerd. Anyone that knows me knows I'm pretty much a nerd. So I've always been kind of like book smart, like, oh, I'm reading, making straight A's or doing that kind of jazz, right? So the fear of cannabis was always placed inside of me. So, um, uh, you know, I'm gonna tell my first time I smoked weed story, if you don't mind, really.
Oh,
So,
please. Please.
so one of my closest friends, God rest her soul, she passed away last year in a car accident. Um, we've known each other. We had known each other since we were in high school. Uh, so we went to the summer camp. We were teenagers, yada yada yada. We go to college. We go back and we work at the summer camp, yada yada yada. And so, one summer we're, in Alabama, yeah, all in Alabama, in Birmingham, Alabama, where I'm from. And one summer after, we worked at the summer camp, we're all, still on summer break from college. Oh, well, actually, this is after I graduated from college, and I tell him, like, I'm going to backpack across Europe for the summer after, in a couple of weeks. That was my graduation present to myself. I was like, white people aren't the only people that can backpack across Europe. I want to do this. And my friend Gloria, who's this Korean woman, love her to death, and our friend Gaines, they tell me, she's like, I'm not gonna send a black man to Amsterdam, to Europe and Amsterdam, never having smoked weed. Because I had never smoked weed. I was like 23 years old, never smoked weed before. And I was like, okay. And so basically, they hotbox me, and we get like in her car in the parking lot, like a week before I go to Europe, just to get a sample. To be fair, she was 100% correct about me about that because I go to Amsterdam. First night I'm there, I walk into the Bulldog Hostel, which is very famous back in the day, and I look up, and who do I see? But literally two people also from Birmingham, Alabama, that me and Gloria also know, smoking weed at the bar.
Oh my gosh.
So I felt very confident being like, "Hey guys,
Yeah.
I'll smoke one with you. I've done this before." So she was always right. Is the point I'm making here? But that's the long and short of it is that the fear of cannabis had been put into me so long. Up until I was 23, I was like, oh, and then I smoked. I was like, oh, this isn't bad. It helps me expand my mind and think about bigger things and communicate with partners and friends and whatnot. It was actually a really great feeling. So that's how I got brought into cannabis. Um, and to get through all the worky stuff, after college, I went to an HBCU, historically black colleges and universities, Alabama A&M University, go Bulldogs. And after that, I went into labor union work. I worked for SEIU for a number of years. Then I went to the Peace Corps and served in Jamaica. That's really where I learned where good weed comes from. I have to
Yeah.
don't tell the United States Peace Corps I said that. But yeah, it's great. Jamaica has great weed and great cannabis. And then I went to graduate school in England, got my master's degree in human rights, came back to the States and worked and continued my work in nonprofit work, went back working in labor for a while, did LGBTQ work, worked to fight for marriage equality, worked to fight for rights for students with the University of California Student Association, organizing marches, protests, rallies, engaging in strikes and whatnot. So I come from the cannabis space from a community organizing and community engagement.
That's awesome. And so what brought you from Alabama to California, and when did you make that transition? Did you do high school, college, Alabama, Jamaica, London, California?
Something like that. Yeah, yeah. I was very convoluted. Like, yeah, I spent most of my life in Alabama. Like, I travel a lot. My sister was actually born in California. She's born in Venice.
Oh,
It spent most of her, and my mom lived in California in the Venice area back when Venice was actually a black neighborhood, believe it or not. Like most people, I didn't know about this history until I was talking to my mom about it recently, because I was telling her about our Eaze office that is near Venice. I'm just gonna say that, just so people don't show up to figure out where it is. But and I was telling her that, and she was like, "Oh, Venice, that's where your sister was born, and that's where like it was a really black neighborhood back in the day." And so it was really fascinating. So my family has always had deep roots in California. I have cousins, family. My sister was born here. But yeah, after I got back from England, I actually got a job offer in Oakland, and I always wanted to live in San Francisco and in the Bay Area in Oakland, and so I took it up and ran, and I've been here in the Bay for about 11 years now.
awesome. Awesome. So you were doing so you're in the Bay Area, you're doing community engagement, organizing for the LGBTQ community, and then
Bunch of communities to be
well,
perfect, like students, black, like I did a lot of work with the New Leaders Council, a lot of work with men and boys of color programs with the green lining, I think it was Green Lining Institute and some other folks as well. So yeah.
and then what was sort of your first step into cannabis career wise? Was Eaze it?
Yeah, Ease was it because I was working with the Representation Project. I don't know if you've heard of them. They
Mhm.
make movies, documentaries, social kind of social justice or social kind of consciousness movies. And so I was working with them as the engagement director for the Representation Project, which was run by Gavin Newsom's wife, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, governor of
Oh
California,
yeah.
the first partner, I think she calls herself these days. Um,
Love it.
And yeah, and so I left that position and went to and started my own consulting company called Just Kind Consulting, justinkind.com. And I did that for about a year, and in that process, I realized how very hard it is to run your own company and your own consulting company.
Yes.
Yeah, and so about a year in, my cousin called me and said like, "Hey, you live in California. I would love to invest in weed. I hear this weed like y'all legalize it recreationally. It's like this was at the start of the green rush, right after adult legalization here in California in 17. And he was like, "Hey, I'd love to invest. Can you maybe figure out like ways to do that?" And I was like, "Okay, I'm a consultant. This is what I do. Let me do some research and figure this out." And in my research, I realized like, oh wow, like first I realized the one of the core issues to cannabis was social equity. How are Black and Brown folks, how are people who are affected by the war on drugs making money? How are they engaging in this community? How are they being economically uplifted? Black and Brown people were devastated by the war on drugs for so many years. Um, Black people were incarcerated at 10 times the rate of white people who also use the same drug, cannabis, weed, at the same exact levels as everybody else.
Yeah.
Asian, black, white, doesn't matter. We all use cannabis at the same percentage levels for our population. So why are we laying this burden on black people? Well, first we lay the prison burden on black people, black and brown people. Then we lay the economic burden on them as well, in the sense of, the cannabis space being so expensive to get into, social equity not being focused. So I noticed that problem, and I called my cousin and was like, well, here's what I found. But what I really, in my mind, I was like, this is not, how do I really engage in cannabis? I was like fascinated by it because by that point I had been a cannabis user for, what, since I was 23, reasonably since I was like maybe like 25. But like, it's been over 15 years by that point. So I was like, um, I'm an organizer. I believe in certain rights and justice for people, especially black people. So I went looking for a job in cannabis because I realized, well, if I want to affect this community, this ecosystem, this economy, this burgeoning nascent economy, I need to understand how it works. Who are the power players? What companies are big? And for me, I feel like the only way to get that kind of inside knowledge is to actually go inside. And so I went looking for careers in cannabis that would allow me to use my organizing community skills in a way to better, hopefully, the cannabis culture and community.
And so you were living in Oakland at the time, and you
Uh,
and you came across
San
Eaze.
Francisco. I live in San Francisco now, but
Yeah.
I live 5 years in Oakland. I'm like, I'm like 6 years in San Francisco. It's very, yeah. Housing is an issue in the Bay Area.
It is. It definitely is. I totally understand
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So how did you come across Eaze, and was the community manager position available, or was that, kind of created for you and this role?
It was available. What was interesting is that, when I joined Eaze was very much articulating the point that we're a tech company, not a cannabis company. And Eaze still is actually, yeah, 2018 actually, but and it is actually the fact. Ease is tech is a technology company, but the way we engaged in cannabis kind of muddied that water a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because as a tech company, we did not have the right or ability to like demand that people who own the licenses, the ones who own the delivery depots that were utilizing our platform to sell cannabis, we can demand certain things and engage in certain ways. And so, fast forward like 2 years since I've been at the company, almost 2 years since I've been at the company, we've started this verticalization process where we actually have multiple structures. Eaze stays a technology company while there is a separate arm of the overall corporate structure that allows for management and more direct control over cannabis licenses. So to your point, when I joined, it was very much like a thought process of like a normal tech company, right? Like Instacart or think Salesforce or whatnot, right? Like, oh, you need to engage with the community of the folks who use our product, right? So it was that. What I also learned is that most cannabis companies did not have a staffer that engaged in social equity, community, or any sort of like kind of non-direct sales or anything that wasn't sales or cultivation or licensing or legal. It's like most cannabis companies kind of blocked it out and didn't really engage. So Eaze was one of the first and only companies actually hiring people to engage with the cannabis community.
And so what's the nature of your job? Like how do you approach engaging with the community? And how does that benefit Eaze and the industry?
Yeah, so the nature of my job is multi-tiered. It's so multifold. I have to say I give a lot of credit to the team at Eaze and everyone because um, it really was a lot of. It was a really fun. It's a fun startup culture in the sense that I come in, they're like, "Here's what we want you to do." All right, I spend the first month or two trying to dissect, figure out what they want me to do and what's doable, what's not doable, what I want to do, figure out what pieces I want to add to the puzzle. And we figure out that parts of what they wanted me to do aren't necessarily we're able to do as a company, but there are these other parts I found ways to integrate in. So to your point, we were able to find ways to integrate in like a lot of work around Black and Brown communities, around younger, more progressive communities, right? Trying to really engage more with Black communities directly, because that's something I think the company had not fully engaged in when I joined. There was not really a full engagement around the traditional cannabis culture, the Black folks who helped create the original cannabis culture here in California and in the Bay Area. And so I wanted to use any connections that I had to do that. Also, cannabis in California has a very specific lens to it when it comes to labor and unions. So most people don't know that California, when they legalized recreational, also passed a law that required that cannabis companies with more than 20 employees would have to sign a labor peace agreement. That's not a contract. That's not some sort of bargaining agreement. It's just a memorandum of understanding to say that we as a cannabis company understand the rights of workers to unionize if the workers want, and we have gotten to a peaceful agreement to work with the union to help look at that angle of our workforce if the workers want to organize, and done in a peaceful way so it's not contentious, it's not a fighting thing. And luckily, I had over 6 years of experience in labor unions. So what happened is that over the months in my first year, my work evolved into also engaging very heavily with our labor partners and labor unions because I had deep connections with labor in California before joining Eaze, engaging very directly with communities of color and trying to ingrain them into the systematic work of the company, and also engaging more directly with our depot partners. Those are the ones who actually sell the weed, manage the drivers, do the day-to-day work. So how can we best as community, as Eaze and our community staff support our depot staff who are on the ground in neighborhoods with staff? Like, what can we do to support the drivers? What can we do to support them engaging with the community as a whole so that we can be good actors in this space?
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit more about some ways in which I want to go more into the social equity conversation. And I think it's something that is obviously getting more is being talked about more now these days. We're seeing states like New York who aren't passing adult use bills unless not only is that included, but that it's included properly. So we're starting to see change, on the legislative front as well. But as far as brands and what they can do and how they can engage with community, what are some steps that you would suggest or recommend for cannabis companies to start not only engaging in this conversation further, but engaging with their community? What if they maybe don't have an Eaze budget or they don't have, the resources? What are some immediate first steps that you can say as an organizer and as a person in this community? What would you suggest to brands? How can they do that better? And what do you see working or being effective?
Yeah, so I'm going to give a shout out to so for an example, I'll give a really good example, a very recent one. So, with all the uprisings and the people really want their voices and opinions heard to our elected officials and as a society as a whole around anti-blackness and racism, is that we are, I got outreach to by one of our brands staffers reached out to me and said, "Hey, I got a call from I'm gonna give this is a good shout out, so hopefully they're not gonna be mad at me. But and they're on our menu. I love them to death. They make the best edibles. It's called Atlas. I don't know if you ever had
Yeah,
them.
I've heard. I know Atlas. Yeah.
Yeah, a Berkeley-based company. Amazing. They make the most amazing granola edibles that are just it's perfect, just amazing. And they're all like healthy and great flavors, and they're all like it's so organic-y. It's like great, right? I'm so California right now. But they reached out and said, "Hey, we don't have a lot of resources, right?" And they're like, we're a strong company, but we're not billions on billions of dollars, right? We don't have all this money to throw, to just give out to anyone. So they were like, we have limited resources. How can we effectively use those limited resources? So that was, for me, that was a very good um that was a very good notice for me that a lot of companies want to do something but don't know how, and they are reaching out to their partners that may have the expertise, the staff, myself, others in the e-space to figure out that. So first I would say ask the right questions. What money do you have available? So start with that. What resources do you have available? Do you have sweat equity? Do you have staff that are willing to do things? Do you have financial resources? Do you have, cannabis resources, right? Do you have cannabis products you are willing to give out for compassionate care and other things like that? So that's the first thing. Figure out what resources you have available. And then like Atlas, once you've figured that out, you reach out to your broader community and say hey folks, we want to target our resources. Who are the people we can target to, right? Because I would say the cannabis community and space is very tight knit. Like the old
Yeah.
school cannabis community, the folks who've been doing it for years and years and years, they are hella tight knit.
Yeah.
Um, and even in this space where you have big companies, you have Eaze and Calivas and Humboldt Farms and all these folks, right? Old pals. Um, uh, uh, Even with these kind of big spaces, you can find ways to get that support, work with folks, figure out within this tight knit circle who's actually doing the work. Because I have to say, there are people out there, as people do in life in general, that are taking advantage of the situation. Upheaval and uprisings and revolutions do cause disturbances. It causes for destruction of property. Sometimes it causes for things that aren't necessarily things I approve of and would like to see happen, but these things happen in the world as people are trying to have their rights and their voices heard. And so there are people out there who take advantage of that. So we want to make sure that we're targeting. It should be very clear to partners to try to target your resources on people who aren't taking advantage of the situation. So there are, for example, there are folks out there who legitimately equity companies got hit by
Yeah.
their buildings being broken into, their products being stolen. One of our equity partners, lost 50, $100,000 in product, for a small company that, he does most of the work himself.
Yeah.
Like he packages the product, like he does all the things. He does the deliveries. He's the distro. And so you want to, I would say, also find those people. Reach out and say like, hey, you're an equity company. You're a black owned company. Um, all right, you may have been. Let's see, figure out how you can help that company. Figure out how you as an entity can actually engage in these companies. At the end of the day, people just want to be heard and they want to be ingrained into the business practices. People think you have to create a, people. I think my experience is that people think you have to create a sort of some sort of specific affirmative action program where you set up quotas and deadlines and like, well, we will have 10% of this being given by black people and we will have 10% of our company being hired by black people. And that is disrespectful to black people and is disrespectful to um, the process as a whole. What people need to do is figure out who are the black people doing stuff. There are black people out there today doing stuff. Engage with them. Just say, hey, I'm here to listen, learn, and support. What can I do? And that's a great place to just start.
I like that. So you're saying, to summarize, ask the right questions, reach out to those in your immediate community who are doing the work. Take inventory of what you do have available, and whether it's sweat equity, actual money capital, employees, time that can be donated. Ask questions, take inventory, reach out to your community, and essentially not overcomplicate it with like quotas and numbers and adding structure, that you can have impact and make it simple without trying to, I don't know if do too much is the right word, but without trying to systemize it and process it in a way that feels inauthentic.
Exactly. No, you're exactly right. Thank you for summarizing my very long diatribe there. But no, you're exactly right. The issue with this idea of quotas or specific number targets, like at the end of the day, it's disrespectful because it's not authentic enough because it doesn't really say, I'm trying to find the best black person, I'm trying to find the best diverse staffer. It says, I just need a body to fill a hole. And if you have a body if you're just looking at a body to fill a gap in your business, then you pick anybody. You find somebody, whether or not they're good, qualified or not. And then subsequently what happens is either that person may be great, like, awesome, but also that person may not have actually been qualified for that position. So you put them at a deficit because you didn't set them up for success. Or that person is not then therefore supported. They're just like, oh, they were the equity hire. They were the affirmative hire. We had to, we're trying to diversify so people didn't like think we were racist. So, we hired this black person, we hired this Latino person. And so that's also inauthentic. It does not feel great for the person hired because then they don't feel like they're really valued at the company.
Yeah, and I think what you said is a really good point that I want to reiterate about setting up whatever the initiative is for success. And, we're hearing a lot of talk about performative allyship and people who are acting to make the statement because they have to, and now's the time. But I think there's a lot to be said for, regardless of what you're doing on a big or small level, that making sure it's authentic and that there's follow through, and that the follow through can be, even if it's measured on a really small scale, but that the follow through can happen, and that this step is taken, that the action is taken, regardless of your resources. So I like that language around setting it up for success and making sure whatever the initiative you're doing, that plan is in place.
Yeah. Companies should set out a pipeline, right? Like, and also don't look at this as like short term or intermediate.
Yeah.
Look at it as ingrained into the marrow of your company. So I use this example internally at Eaze that um, when you set up programs and initiatives for diversity or hiring women or whatever it is, what happens is these things become siloed. They sit over here. The
Yeah.
company is here. These things sit over here. And they want to layer on top, right? They just want to layer it on top and say, like, look, we have this thing. What I argue for companies, including my own, is that and luckily my company is very receptive to this, and I appreciate that, is that we ingrain it into the marrow, into the bone, into the structure. Because it is easy. Have you ever made a cake before?
A few, not many, but a few.
Right? If you have a layer cake, right? Let's say you're starting to make a cake, or you have all the pieces together, and you put another layer on top of a cake. Oh, but at a certain point you realize, I don't like that layer, or it's ugly, or I just don't, it doesn't look good. You can always just take that layer off. And that's how I think about these programs when you look at a layering effect. If at any time you think it's not economical, you just get tired of it, or it's caused more harm, quote unquote, whatever that might be, than good in your eyes, at the company's eyes, they just take that layer off. You can easily, a budget crunch happens. Oh, we got to take layers off. What layers can we take off, right?
Yeah.
And that oftentimes become the first layer to leave, right? And so I argue for ingraining these things deep into the marrow of the company. So it becomes, by unraveling this thread, you unravel the company. That's how you have to fight anti-blackness and racism, is that you have to ingrain it so deep into the culture. You have to put it into the marrow of your company structure, so that people know that our pipeline for black and brown applicants, our sourcing structure for social equity cannabis, our branding structures, all integrate black and brown people, all integrate social equity companies so intrinsically that we can't just cut this out. We can't take that layer off, because if we take that layer off, we've actually just destroyed the whole cake. And nobody wants to destroy the whole cake. And that's how systematic oppression actually happens. People say, oh, well, this is a big problem. How do we fix it? And then they layer these structures on it. And then the moment people start arguing about those structures, they start taking them off and saying, like, this isn't working, this isn't good. But if you ingrain these structures so deep into your program, into your system, you can never take them out unless you want to revamp the entire system. And what do we see right now in the world? People saying, restructure everything, defund the police, restructure how everything is done, because the structures that are built are not appropriate and not working. And so that's what you need to do in these rebuilding of structures. When you look at your company, say, what is the structure of our company to fight anti-blackness? What specifically do we do, and how do we ingrain that into the work we do every day?
I love that example with the cake. That makes it so clear. So just to get a little more tangible with that, so in terms of building these structures that cannot be, pulled apart when things get tough. You had mentioned about having a really solid pipeline of Black candidates and making sure that your community outreach is solid and strong, and that you're touching everybody, so that, to your point earlier, saying if you have the diversity hire, but it's maybe not the best person, if that pipeline is full and robust, not only can you find the right candidate, but they will be the best fit for your company.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you talk a little bit more? I just want to get a little bit more at the tangible ways that companies can do this, because I think where people are starting to get this concept, but not understanding how maybe to do that without it seeming like, putting quotas and numbers and making it seem inauthentic. Like, what are some ways in which you can make it inextricably intertwined with the company and feel authentic? I know that's sort of a nebulous question, but I just want to try to get at some more actionable steps for our listeners as well.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think at the end of the day, it starts with the core question. I'm a very big fan of the Socratic method, the idea of asking questions to help someone illuminate their own answers and their own truths. And so I think all of this starts with questions. Start with, what is our company's role in fighting anti-blackness? How has our company engaged in fighting anti-blackness? What have we done in the past? What do we want to do in the future? How much do we actually want to put into this? Once again, to your point, let's make it authentic. How much do we actually want to put into this? If you say, oh, well, for example, there are a lot of companies out there dropping $1 million here, dropping $25,000 there, dropping $100,000 here, and just giving it to groups and programs and whatnot. And that's super, super great. That doesn't solve anti-blackness and racism, though. Right? At the core, we all have to do hard work. And so the first step is just asking the right questions. Say, like, what are you really willing to give up here? Because fighting racism and fighting anti-blackness requires a lot of money, time, and effort. I'm not gonna lie to you. Not like half of your budget or something. Like, no, 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 no. But you got to put some skin in the game. You got to
Yeah.
make sure it counts. I told people recently, I said, we, as we move forward in the cannabis space, thinking we want to really fight anti-blackness, fight racism, and we want to support the black and brown folks affected by the war on drugs who are starting cannabis business, social equity companies. Ha- uh, if we do not have a line, if we do not have a budget for it, if we do not have money put behind it, if there is not substantial amount of resources that shows the company is serious about it, then keep your thoughts and prayers. Because that's all anything else is. Anything else other than time, deep integration into the company, money, resources, staffing, time, all these things. If all those things, all those tangible things are not ingrained into your solution, you might as well call it thoughts and prayers and just keep it for yourself. Because I have 2 degrees in political science, so I'm a political history nerd and buff, if you will, and uh, 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 there's a saying in politics that budgets define your values. So if you ever want to see the value of a country, what countries value, you see where they spend the most of their money. Where do we spend the most of our money here in the United States? The military.
Yeah.
Hmm.
By
What
far.
what do we value? We spend more on our military than the next 10 countries combined in the world.
Yeah.
Combined. Take the next 10, combine them, and ours is like 3 times theirs. You know what I mean? Um, so what does that tell you? Well, that tells you what our values are. Our values are guns, bombs, and bullets. While you look at other countries, let's take the United Kingdom for a really great example. I used to live there. You know what their number one budgetary issue is?
What is
The
it?
NHS, the National Health Service. Oh, wow, they spend most of their money. Doctors, nurses, healthcare, psychiatrists, training folks, making sure that everything is like, making sure they have a system that makes sure everyone gets healthcare and no one dies of cancer because they just simply don't have health insurance. There is no, in the UK, you can buy private health insurance, and that private health insurance is literally like, I want a private room or I want to do plastic surgery. It's for like fancy stuff that is not at all like life threatening. Um, but they spend the majority of their money on healthcare. And so that should be the question that companies ask. Where are we spending the majority of our money, right? Are we spending on lavish drinks, hotels? I remember reading an article about, MedMen, you know, um, about how the previous CEO, not the current one, I believe, but the previous spent millions on
Yeah.
events and parties and private jets and so on and so forth. And so I asked every cannabis company, if you have money on private jets and to parties and dinners at Nobu in LA, you know what I mean? If you have money for all that and you're telling me you have no money for social equity, then your values are wrong.
Yeah, that's fair, and I think that's a really good point to bring up about budgets. I love that what you said. So I want to get into kind of last question and concept here about how to talk about this. And I'm saying this from the perspective of I'm seeing brands obviously posting about what they're doing, what action steps they're taking, and I think there's this line again of taking steps, posting them on social media, and doing it to hold yourself publicly accountable, but also there's a perception it can feel like performative allyship.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you as a brand sort of understand, and again, I know this is a difficult question, but like, what is that line, and how do you how do you engage in these initiatives and hold yourself publicly accountable and tell your customers, tell your constituents about it, post about it, let people know, hey, here's what we're doing, and do it in a way that is authentic?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. So this is, I don't really pay attention. I'm not a marketer. But I do love the news, and I pay attention to all this stuff. And I will say that recently, I don't know if you've watched the blow up about Adidas or Adidas, because they're German. So I was in Germany, and they were like, "Oh, Adidas." I was like, "Oh, it's not pronounced Adidas." Okay, gotcha.
I've been wrong my whole life.
I know. I was like, "Oh, who knew?" But Adidas. So recently, last week, Adidas actually did, to your point, they posted on social media, they gave money to, Black Lives Matter or some group, a black oriented group. And then they posted, we stand with, Black Lives Matter, and we stand with, fighting racism, yada, yada, yada. And then a black assistant designer at Adidas wrote a letter to the company and then sent it to the newspaper, published it for everyone to see. It basically said, like, Adidas is saying Black Lives Matter, but let me tell you the truth about Adidas. And right. And they like went through the litany of black people at Adidas have been complaining about this forever, and y'all have done nothing. So you say Black Lives Matter, but the black people in your company don't feel like we matter. Right. And so then Adidas came out with another statement that said, we hear our staff, we're having, like, sometime this week, they're having an all company meeting to hear these things and to talk about them. You know what would have been great, Adidas, if you had had that all company meeting before you had made that statement? How about, so that's one thing, right? To your point, how do you be authentic? Well, start by being actually authentic.
Yeah.
Ask the question, have an all company meeting and say, like, hey, I don't know if we're good to our black staff. You don't have to say it like that. That's a little crass. It's a little too candid. But you can say, like, hey, we've heard issues. We've probably ignored them in the past. We probably haven't put in as much effort as we should have. We're in a different time and different world and different space, and we want to listen now. I'm a strong believer in, don't yell at someone for showing late to the party, as long as they got to the party. As long as you're getting to the party, that's the most important business. So they're trying to get to the party. The party is fighting anti-blackness. Mm-hmm. So you want to actually be authentic. And it's fascinating that we actually have this conversation in our world around, like, how to be authentic. And the question is, be authentic.
Yeah.
Like, say what is in your heart. Say it in a nice way. Be tactful. Be strong. Be empathetic. But the issue is then that, I think to some companies, I think the core question might be, if you can't be authentic, what's wrong with, like, what's going on here, right? Like, why can't you be authentic? So one thing, actually be authentic. Be honest and earnest with your staff. Say, before you go out to the world and proclaim how great you are and how much you support the blackness and black people and fighting racism, actually ask the black people in your life. Here's the real question. Also, do you have any people in your life to ask? If the answer is no, wow. If you only have one black person or two black people, once again, the question is answered. Then you really are not aware of this. You have not. So then you have to do the work. White America, you got to go out and do the work. Marketers, you got to go out and learn about racism. You got to learn about anti-blackness. You got to learn about what your company is doing and all of this stuff. So to your point, learn. Pick up a book, read, watch a movie. People are throwing out, like, watch this documentary, read this book. Like, it's littered with information today. So go out and learn. And then once you've done that, be as authentic as you can with your company and say, we want to do better. Tell us how we can do better. And to your point, I'm saying, figure out what that budget is. Ask those questions. What are we willing to contribute to this? How are we going to ingrain this into our company's daily life, so that it becomes like the air we breathe. A friend of mine always used to tell me, like, I've known him for like over 16 years, and he's very much older than me. I like to make that joke to him, but he's about 10 years older than me, give or take. And I always like to, he used to always say to me, um, oh man, racism. Oh yeah, I talk about racism, how bad it is. He say like, oh, it's like the air we breathe. And for years, I knew what he meant, but I really didn't know what he
Is he
meant.
white?
No, he's black. He's black, and he always used to say like, oh yeah, it's like the. Anytime I would say something about racism or something, he's like, yeah, that's like the air we breathe. Or I would say like, oh man, like white this happened and that's harmful to black people. He's like, yeah, that's like the air we breathe. Until I actually realized it, it's like this systematic world we live in, the racism, the anti-blackness, it literally is the air we breathe. You know, people make excuses for them not being racist or them not being anti-black because they specifically have not done anything. Like I haven't called anybody the N-word. I haven't, told people racist, horrible things. I haven't not dated someone because they're black. Like I haven't done these racist things, so therefore I can't be racist. When in actuality, racism is in the air we breathe in the world. Whether or not you know it or not, these little aggressions, these micro things, the everything that happen and we do in our world is just there. And so what we have to do is make anti-blackness the air we breathe. We have to make anti-racism the air we breathe. We actually, and that comes from saying it and talking it. You have to like say like, I don't have a lot of black friends. What is that about? Like you actually have to say that to yourself.
Yeah.
And so to the core point is like be authentic, ask the right questions, try to understand your company and your people, and don't go off on social media and in the public saying what you believe in when your own house is not in order. One other really quick point to that is, I'm a big Glee fan. I was a really big Glee fan back in the day. I was a Gleek. Um, and recently, Leah Michelle, who was the star of Glee, is getting reamed in social media in the world because she came out and said, I stand with Black Lives Matter and we need to fight racism and anti-blackness, blah, 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 blah. And then a black co-star of hers from the last season of Glee said, but you said these horrible things to me that were hurtful and discriminatory and bad and whatnot. And then other people came out and said, I don't know if Leah Michelle is racist, but she really doesn't treat people well. Right? It's just, oh, she treats everybody bad. Like white people were coming out saying, yeah, no, Leah Michelle has treated me horribly. Right? So what it boils down to is like, look at yourself, look internally before you go out and proclaim your values to the world. Don't perform authenticity. Be authentic.
I love that. And I speaking of like phrases that resonate, I love the one that nothing changes without validation. And it feels like we're in a big validation phase, as a society right now of saying we need to not acknowledge that this exists. And while we also need to move towards solutions and we need to do that quickly, but we also need to validate at each level, personally, professionally, the companies you're in, the communities you live in, the communities, all that you're a part of, validate where these issues and where these discrepancies lie. And then once you can really take that look and take stock and validate it is when you can start to ask the questions, start to reach out, start to take that inventory and move towards solutions that are authentic, appropriate, and sort of wholly vetted to some degree. And that's how we create change, and that's how we move the needle forward. But it seems like that validation and that asking questions phase cannot be missed. And cannot
it's the most important, right? It is the investigation period. It's where you learn your values, right? You read, you understand, you gather this information. In graduate school they always teach you like one of my professors always say like, I don't care what you think, just that you think. Right? If you can come and investigate something, come to an earnest, honest opinion. And if you think to yourself, oh, no, this is all blown over proportion and black people aren't discriminated against, then that's your honest opinion. Then go, great, so be it. God bless, get out of my way. But if you do the proper research and stop taking talking points and talking heads and look at the world that is in front of you, you have no choice but, I think, in my opinion, to realize the discrepancies, the racial injustices, the anti-blackness that currently exist. And if you can see that and you still say, not my problem, then what are your real values? Who are you as a person? What do you actually believe in? And that's something that is really, and I want to also point out that companies do not use your black staff as your sounding board, counselor, motivation speaker, we are not Morgan Freeman and Driving Miss Daisy. We are not Viola Davis in The Help. We are not, we are not any of these, we are not the magical Negro trope. Have you ever heard of that trope by any chance?
Mm-mm.
If you look at movies, you can probably think of several movies right now off the top of your head, but oftentimes black people are depicted in various ways: pimps, hoes, degenerates, blah, blah, blah. But one of the positive ways black people are oftentimes created, which is also problematic, is the magical Negro, meaning that we are positioned as wise, learned, above the fray, more in tune with the world and reality, and then also try to impart that knowledge to the white star of the movie. So Will Smith in Bagger Vance, Lawrence Fishburne in The Matrix, to Keanu Reeves. And the list just kind of goes on and on. This magical Negro trope, kind of, what's his name? Morgan Freeman in Driving Miss Daisy, Viola Davis in The Help, the magical Negro trope. And so don't rely upon us to validate you, to be honest, to support. Like, we want to support you, but like, we want you to do that work amongst yourselves. If black people could have solved racism through through our words and our protest, and our anger and our thoughts, we would have already done it because we've been doing it for 500 years.
Yeah.
Since that is not the case, it is very clear to me that like this conversation needs to happen amongst white people. White people need to talk to other white people about why they hate black people, or why anti-blackness exists, or why racism exists. And that conversation needs to happen there. And white people need to fight with other white people about this conversation. If you got to fight with your granddad at Thanksgiving dinner about how racist he is, then fight with your granddad about it. Don't expect me to fight your granddad for you. Like, if white people aren't willing to stand up and be true and honest and fight anti-racism and fight racism and anti-blackness, then who else will? Our country is majority white. Everything is majority white in our country. So, who else would do it if they won't? And so don't rely upon your black staff. Also, your black staff is tired. Like, I just got an email from someone saying, like, here are, like, it's this long black thread, like, chain, and they basically say, like, they create a whole website for it of, here are some pre-canned answers for all your white friends that message you when they say that. And I was like, oh, I've gotten all these texts, I've gotten all these emails, I've gotten all these messages, and it's really fascinating. It's like white people coming to us for either validation or to say, like, I hear, or something, and it's like, I'm exhausted. Like, after the the Floyd George Floyd uprisings happened, the amount of messages I was getting daily from white coworkers, white friends I haven't talked to in ages, and white people actually like these are white people I consider them friends, or they're good coworkers. Like, I don't hate these people; they're great people. But to say it is not mentally and emotionally exhausting to constantly be getting these questions of, like, I'm your white friend and I want to process this trauma with you right now. It's like, I'm exhausted of processing trauma. I've been processing trauma. I'm 40 years old. I've been processing this trauma for 40 years. I'm exhausted right now. Why don't you go and process that with other white people? And then come back to me with your solutions on how you decided to fight anti-blackness. And then I can tell you how I feel about that. But don't want to process the core with me.
Yeah. That's fair. And I appreciate you taking the time, Darius, today and sharing all this insight. Well, before we go, is there anything else you want to mention or say or, kind of state before we wrap up?
I think I hope this has been a great interview. I have been,
Amazing.
I,
Amazing.
I just speak off. I'm kind of a long talker and kind of long-winded here, so excuse me. But I will end with saying one of my I don't have the quote exactly memorized, but one of my favorite authors is James Baldwin, very famous black author and civil rights leader and everything else. And he was also openly queer throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s when he was alive. And so, I'm a big fan of black queer men, especially historical black queer men. And so he there's a movie actually based on this quote. Is I Am Not Your Negro. It's available on, I believe, Amazon and other things right now. And he says, I'm not a nigga. And America needs to figure out why it needs a nigga. Why does it need a why? Because I'm a man. He would say, I'm a man. And if America needs a nigga, you need to realize and have this internal conversation about why you think you need a nigga. Because I'm not a nigga. So why do you think you need one? And for cannabis, and how I ingrain that into cannabis is like we need to figure out how and why we need a nigga in cannabis. Because in cannabis, especially in California, where many licenses, let's talk about LA licensing, right? Licenses and other things are locked into social equity. They're locked into, oh, well, we don't give out these licenses. Like social equity folks, black and brown folks, people affected by the war on drugs, get access to these licenses first because the governments are trying to at least create a system where we economically enfranchise people affected by the war on drugs. And so I've seen in the cannabis space literally black people being like used for their licenses, being left penniless, nothing. Like big companies come in, use their licenses, and leave them with debt, leave the black people with debt, or leave them with nothing. Give
Wow.
them like a couple $1,000s a month while they are making a couple $1 million a year. So to that point, I think what I want to end on here is that we as the cannabis industry need to figure out why we need black people, especially in social equity spaces. States start to open up, and as social equity becomes more and more the the main concern for cannabis, how do we address anti-blackness and the industry's need for blackness to get licenses to make money off of their backs, but then also disenfranchise and not incorporate blackness into the companies, into the corporations, into their work, not being authentic. So once again, find a way to be authentic so you can figure out how to address this real core question and like look at your own company. Does your company use licenses obtained from black and brown people or people affected by the war on drugs? How much are those people getting paid? What are you doing to help them out further? Engage with these folks. We need to figure out why we need black people in this industry and then figure out how we can enfranchise them to not be needed and used, but how they can be their own individual people and companies managing their own businesses.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Darius. I really appreciate you taking the time and sitting with me today. I'm so grateful. Is there any contact information or ways people can find you that you would want to share?
Yeah, I am available on the Instagram at Darius415, I believe it is. You can that's Darius 415 on the IG. And then justinkind.com. Please check out my website. I need to revamp it, so take some time. And yeah, if you want to reach out to me, I'm at Eaze. So go to our website and just send an email saying, hey, I want to talk to this Darius guy to our press at eaze.com. And they know how to get in touch with me as well. So that's press at eaze.com, I believe. Yeah.
And Eaze is spelled Eaze.
Eaze. Yeah, that's right. Because, technology, can't spell anything with, got to put a three, turn the E into a three or something. Got to do that.
Yep. Awesome. Well, Darius, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Lisa. And I hope all the cannabis marketeers out there go out and be authentic and do great work.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Bye.